Hugh, one of the characteristics that we talk about God is that God is good. As a philosopher, what does that mean to you?
To say that God is good, I think there are probably two main things that we mean by that. First, we think that God always achieves what is good, or always, perhaps even that he always achieves what is best in his actions. And the other thing that we tend to think is that this is something he likes, right? That is to say that he's glad it's that way when the good things happen. That he sees that they're good and that he delights in that. I believe. I think those are the two main things. Now there might be more that I wouldn't say, but others would say.
Okay, what is that?
Well, others would say that God is dispositionally good. That is to say that he does good things because he is already good. Right?
So goodness being one of God's characteristics, one of his traits.
Good is basically a kind of a character trait of God that disposes him to behave well. And I don't like that for two reasons. I mean, one is that it seems to interfere with God's freedom a little bit. I mean, one is inclined to react and say, well, lucky God, he turns out to be good. What if it had been different? Or doesn't he feel fortunate that it didn't turn out the other way? So it's as if he has no real control over it. And then the other thing is it sort of violates a basic tenet of perfect being theology that I sort of inherit from my religious background, I guess, according to which God is supposed to be pure act or perfectly active and has no unrealized dispositions. So that it turns out that God is good because of what he does. He doesn't do what he does because he's good.
So you privilege God far above the goodness, and the goodness is the definition of what God does. So if God did other kinds of things, then that would just redefine the nature of good?
I don't know about that. It's an interesting question to raise, whether if he'd done completely different things, that they would have been good. I don't think that that's true, because they don't get to be good by his declaring them that to be good, or superimposing goodness on them, or something like that. The goodness is, as it were, inherent in the things. And so if you say, well, if he'd done other things, they would have been good too, wouldn't they? Well, then I'm going to say, well, that depends on whether it's inherent in them that they're good.
No, where does this inherent stuff come from?
Well, when I say that things that are good are inherently good, what I mean is something like this: that they're the kind of things that philosophers would say are good in themselves rather than as a means to other things.
Right.
Okay.
Where does that come from? Because you're telling me that there's no absolute goodness until God does something, and God is not motivated to be good. That's not part of his disposition. God is not trying to meet a certain standard of goodness.
Right.
That God is just doing something, right, and that is good.
Well, it turns out to be, yes, right.
And that's not lucky?
No, that's not lucky, because he knows exactly what he's doing.
But why is he doing that? Because he had no motivation to be good.
I think he's doing it for its own sake. He sees it. He wills it.
But not because it's good. Good is not imposing on God a standard, and there's no independent standard.
There's no independent standard, but neither is there an imposition of good on the things themselves, as though they were neutral.
So therefore, it's whatever God is doing.
No, not necessarily that. Not whatever he's doing. What he does is good.
But it is possible that what God could have done would not be good?
There are no could-haves with God. He only does what he does.
Okay, I can imagine God having done other things. You can too.
I would deny it, even if I imagined it.
You would deny that was a possibility?
Yes, I deny that with God there are possibilities. There's only what God does.
Okay,
and possibilities are secondary to what God does.
Okay, that's fine. So God had no possibilities and dealt with no possibilities. God just did what we have, and that's good. And that's not lucky.
No, it's not lucky because it's
Because there were no possibilities. There's only one thing.
Well, to say it's lucky is to say that it wasn't under his control, and I don't see a reason for saying that.
Right, but God had no choice and made no choice in deciding all the different things.
Well, the choice was simply in opting for what he opts for, but it's not a choice among alternatives. It's just a willing of the thing itself.
And the thing, doing the thing itself, was that an option? Either do
It was
it or
not
not
a
do it?
prior option because there are no prior possibilities. The fundamental
So God
reality,
had to do what he did.
there are no prior necessities either.
It just
the
happened.
fundamental reality is the doing of the thing.
I'm trying to get this.
Yeah,
I'm trying.
okay. The fundamental reality is the doing of the thing, and all talk of possibilities and necessities is secondary to that.
All right, so we have this one thing, the thing being the totality of the world that's done, and you're telling me that's good. It's good that God, because that if God.
That turns out to be. I think it's pretty good.
So God created this one thing. There were no other possibilities, and it was good. Why was it good? What is it about this thing that was good? This one thing without possibilities that God did.
All right. In order to answer the question, why is the world good, the world that God made, you have to ask yourself, first of all, what really good is? I mean, what does that mean? Right? In the view that I would ascribe to, and I get this out of Thomas Aquinas, to say that something is good. Oh, and by the way, Aquinas would say that everything insofar as it exists is good, and everything insofar as it has positive being is good. And what that meant for him was just this, that it was a fit object for appreciation by the will, which he sees as fundamentally oriented toward the good and only the good. See, that's why he can approach problems like of say sin and evil in the way he does, which is to say, nobody wills evil for its own sake. That the will is always oriented toward what's good, and to say that ours is oriented toward what's good, as creatures, is to say something like this: that's a reflection of God's own will, which turns out to be oriented toward the good because that's what He creates. And before that, there wasn't anything else.
And so are you defining what's good by what God creates?
No, I'm defining what's good as an appropriate object for appreciation by the will.
The will of God, because of God's creation.
Any will. It turns out not to matter.
If you're defining good in general, but now we're defining the nature, the goodness of what God created. So your referent has to be God's will.
No, I think you really want to have the goodness inherent in the thing. You don't want to have it. You don't want to have it deep.
But how are you getting an independent standard for goodness in that thing when there's no such thing as an independent standard for
right?
good?
There is no. But you don't want a standard independent of the way things are. Right. So if you want to talk about an independent standard of goodness, right? Anything in the end is going to have to be based upon the way things are. It can't be pulled down out of the blue.
And isn't that circular reasoning?
I don't think so.
But it seems that way because you have no independent standard of good. You have what's created as you're defining as good, and then using that to sort of self-define the process. I mean, how are you engaging in that process if it's not circular reasoning? If you don't have an independent standard of good prior to God's creation.
Well, if one sought an independent standard of good, one might try something like this. One might try and define the functions or appropriate functions of things. This is the way people in natural law, ethics, for example, proceed. What they say is that there are appropriate functions for things to carry out. Natural ends toward which they tend, that sort of thing. And that this appropriate function is the way in which you determine what's good. So that a knife, which is designed to cut, is a good knife if it's sharp, okay? If it's designed to be ceremonial, then no, it doesn't have to be sharp, but it'd be nice to have some jewels in the handle or, that sort of thing. So you do that. You define you recognize the function. And in terms of that, you recognize good because good is whatever fulfills the function properly. But in order to do that, you're simply going to then have to do this. You're going to have to say, look, there's an innate teleology in the world, a way things are supposed to go, right? And that then becomes your standard of good. You recognize how things are supposed to go. Well, in a sense, if you say that things insofar as they exist or insofar as they have being are good, that you're really just saying the same thing in a different way. You're just looking at the world and saying, yeah, man, that's the way it ought to be.
And this is what God did. He didn't make any choices because this was the one thing that God did. He had no choice. This was the only thing that happened, and you got it.
There were no prior possibilities. He does what he does. Okay, but the way it's described, I mean, if you look at it in Genesis, what it says is, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God saw that it was good. Okay, one way to take that is to say that those are just three descriptions of precisely the same thing. That there's no difference between as far as what is being described in those three statements. So right from the get-go, you see, the world is seen by God as good, and that's part of what it means to create it.